Lonely Monk Productions.
I don't know if y'all have heard Prime by Christian McBride's new Jawn yet, but yo!
That's my Jawn! Hey yo, displace the guilt and...
What's good, friends and family, neighbors near and far? Welcome to an all-new episode of the Yo, That's My Jawn podcast. The podcast, website, brand, movement, way of life dedicated to the embrace and championing of your passions. I am your host, Nate Runkle, a.k.a. Jonathan Majors, a.k.a. Nate 3.0, back at it again with yet another episode of the podcast. As always, I hope this podcast finds you all in good health and in good spirits. On today's episode, I have an amazing conversation with Kevin Allison, creator and host of the storytelling live show / podcast Risk. And it is a long chat, so I don't want to dilly-dally too much here, but you know I got to check in with my peeps. How we all doing? I know you're probably saying to yourself right now, wait, wasn't this supposed to be an off week of the podcast? Well, sure it was. But when the opportunity presented itself to talk to Kevin ahead of the Philly date of his Risk show, I jumped on it without any hesitation. I have been an enormous fan of MTV's The State, of which Kevin was a member, ever since the very first time I watched it back in the early 90s. So much of my comedic sensibilities can be traced back to every member of that cast. But even more so than how much I love that show, I have always been in awe of the show he created, Risk. Not just as a collection of brutally honest and compelling storytelling, but as a space where people can share out loud with impunity the kind of stories and topics that are usually reserved for close friends or therapists, or maybe never even shared at all. You know, I truly believe that what Risk does is so incredibly important in giving not just an outlet to share the things that we don't normally talk about, but a place to hear stories and experiences that we may be going through and may feel that we're alone in and don't have the permission to discuss. You know, it can be incredibly hilarious and hauntingly tragic or beautifully profound and ridiculously silly. And it shows that all of those things can coalesce and exist on the same stage, frequently in the same night. So yeah, I am incredibly excited to bring this conversation to you today, and I really hope you enjoy it. So, in a minute, after a very quick break, my conversation with Kevin Allison. Yo, That's My Jawn is brought to you by Anchor.fm. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Take a seat. Let me explain. It's free. It costs nothing. $0 and 0 cents. There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Me? I'm doing this from my iPad. It's that simple. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more podcast providers. What's that mean? That means when someone says, hey, how do I find your podcast? You go, you ever hear of a little app called Spotify? Boom, it's there. What's that in your hand, an iPhone? Boom, go to your podcast app. I'm there. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Right from the beginning, straight out the gate, you can make money. Season 1 made me so much money, I could afford a cup of coffee at Starbucks. A grande. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to Anchor.fm to get started. That's Anchor.fm. My guest today got his start as a member of the legendary sketch comedy troupe The State, the cult classic that aired on MTV from 1993 to 1996. Then, in 2009, he created Risk, the live show and weekly podcast where people tell true stories they never thought they'd dare to share in public. It was a DIY passion project that he started in his bedroom and has since gone on to grow to have millions of downloads a month and has featured stories from folks like Janine Garofalo, Mark Maron, Aisha Tyler, Trevor Noah, Margaret Cho, and coming this April, yours truly. He is also the founder and lead instructor of The Story Studio, a storytelling school which offers classes around the USA and online, and corporate workshops domestically and internationally. This Thursday, March 2nd, you can catch him bringing the Risk Live show to Philadelphia at the World Cafe Live. Folks, it is my honor to welcome to the show, Kevin Allison. Ladies and gentlemen, I am joined today by the great Kevin Allison. Kevin, thank you for joining me on Yo, That's My Jawn.
It's so great to be here. Thank you.
So I always like to tell everybody a little connection piece I have with them. And something came up very recently with you that you play a very important part in my life with. And I didn't know until recently. So do you ever have one of those quotes that you like just quote all of the time and you know it's a quote from somewhere, but you've used it so much you've lost where it came from?
Yeah, absolutely.
So a friend of mine, Jawn, has been working on this project where he's been trying to edit all of the original music cues back into the state sets. Because of the licensing. So yeah, he's he's talked to David about it and stuff like that because he's been trying to track down certain music, like tiny little snippet music clues that he can't figure out, right? So he put a master list. He put a master list together of all the missing clips and sent them out to friends, and he sent one to me to try to identify some. And one of the ones he couldn't figure out was I Just Whispered Your Name by Harry Connick Jr. from the rideshare sketch.
From Dream Boy.
Dream Boy, that was it, yes. You and Carrie driving in the car. And I'm watching the clip trying to see the music cue he wanted, and it gets to the part where you have the sock puppet on your hand. And you do, I'm not liking you. And I have been doing that for, I guess, over 20 years now and completely forgot where it came from. So thank you. There's a long story, but thank you for that.
That is amazing. Yeah, when my sketch comedy group from college got our own show on MTV, they really insisted that we include as much music from their music catalog in the show, that we wallpaper it with all this music from all the stuff that they had copyrights to show on the air. Little did we know they didn't have the copyrights to then preserve those shows and distribute them later. It was just for live airing was all they had the rights for. So, God, it was just yet another one of those things where Viacom was just really screwing things up by cutting corners because, we were so hesitant to, we loved Monty Python, and we also loved the Muppet Show and Sesame Street. We had no comedy education, right? So we just went with shit that we were exposed to as children on TV, and that stuff is generally, especially the Pythons, timeless. It's not, we're going to imitate this popular culture figure and we're going to, I still today cringe all the time when I see, on SNL or whatever, just bringing someone on dressed like someone else and saying something they said on TV earlier that week. It's okay, great, So we were trying to do more archetypal stuff that would last forever. And I think a lot of it, I think most of it really still holds up. I haven't seen it very recently, but I think most of it still really holds up. But it's a shame because we were so hesitant to actually make pop culture references the way they wanted us to. But we were like, well, fuck yeah, we'll use all that music. We had a blast with that. In fact, it was my idea for the soundtrack to the promo for our second season, which really kind of finally put us over, was the tipping point of us kind of finding some popularity, which was, our first season was so horribly reviewed by TV reviewers who were just, of an older generation and did not get our kind of young inside, just the chemistry of kids fooling around. And so our first season, it was just as good as the next three, but the critics didn't get it yet. So we just got horrible, so terrible it deserves to be studied. The daily news in New York suggested that we were maybe the worst thing that had happened in the history of broadcasting. And so we decided to take these quotes and run them on the screen while we're shown in tremendous depression. We're hanging our heads and we're skipping stones in a river and we're looking rather suicidal. And you use the Bee Gees. I started a joke that started the whole world laughing. That song. I love a lot of those, like 60s songs that are like so maudlin. Like another one a lot like that is Gilbert O'Sullivan that song. That song. I think it's about he's going to end his life at the end of the song. But anyway, yeah, when people, us making fun of ourselves with the I started a joke, it's called More Miserable Crap is what the ad campaign is known as. And somehow that just started to make things click for us. People were like, because I think people were not used to at that time ironic marketing, Yeah. So it was super cool. Yeah. And there were a lot. Oh, I'm sorry. Go on.
No, you go. You don't let me stop you. You go.
Yeah, no, there were lots of sketches on the state that were kind of inspired. Like the whole Barry and Levon thing, that the sketch $240 worth of pudding, that really just came from us sitting around, because what you would have to do, you would have to look through these giant notebooks of catalogs, which kind of looked like if you go to a karaoke bar, you'll get a big binder and just look at lists of songs. And there was a whole bunch of those because, they had a lot of just like what weren't even really videos, but like clips from stuff like, I don't know, the Monkees or the Beatles or whatever back in the day, A Hard Day's Night or whatever. And one day we were just like, give us everything you have from what is his name? George. What's the name of the singer? The soul singer was like, baby.
Barry
White. Barry White. Yeah. So we were just loving the Barry White songs. And out of that, the Barry and Levon sketch was born, of everyone just walking around talking like Barry White all day one day.
It's
which as an all white group we might not get away with today.
I don't like, it's really funny. And I think that's one of the craziest things is like, I know when I look back at the things I did essentially in college, there's stuff that I will pray remain buried. But the show you guys did like still is hilarious. And I can't think of anything that's too cringy in it. In the last time I rewatched it, like it's all from a good place.
Yeah, it's very, I always thought of us, it's kind of similar to Python, as having a sort of kiddish energy, sort of like a childish, playful energy, but from a very creatively intelligent place, similar to the Pythons in their very British way. It's very smart, but it's also incredibly kiddish. It's kind of harmless in a lot of ways. At the time I was 23 years old when we were on TV, and I come from Cincinnati, Ohio, and I was born in the 70s, and Cincinnati was like the most sex negative town north of the Mason-Dixon line. That's where the Larry Flint trial and the Mapplethorpe trial, and just, whenever something like Hair or Equus or whatever would come to town, the theater would be raided and all that, if there was any nudity in a play. So it's just a very, very conservative Roman Catholic town. And I was so happy to get out of there. And, I came out to my parents as being gay a week before going to NYU. I mean, that was like, I made sure that all the student loans were going to happen and that the plane ticket was good. And then I was like, all right, I'm going to come out. But whenever a new episode of The State would come out, I'd get a call from my mom, and she'd be beside herself about some joke in the show that was sexual or referred to religion, to Christianity in any way. And it's so funny because whenever I tell people, it was upsetting to be able to have to deal with a parent who was so upset at your work week after week. But whenever I tell that to people, they're like, oh my God, that show was not like rude or pushing the envelope so much with all those things. And I'm like, yeah, well, that's where I'm from.
It's true. And one of the things that I think kind of comes through there, and it might be part of the kind of NYU connection, is that like it's very kiddish and stuff like that, but so smart. Like it's almost like a Marx Brothers kind of humor, in that like it's just dumb people in a very straight world, like
what is so funny about your saying that is or about both of us saying this, is it's only occurring to me now that the very first state sketch that was ever performed was Child Linguistics 101, which we never did for television. I was not in the state when they did their first show. The group was called The New Group when we were at NYU. And the very first sketch was supposed to be a college class taught by Michael Showalter, playing the professor, who was teaching the kids child linguistics. So it was all, your rubber on glue and poo poo and pee pee. It was all these ridiculous, us being able to unpack in an intellectual and academic way all these absurdly childish things. And that really, I think, set the tone for what we were doing from then on.
Oh, it's so great. And it's just, it's such a staple of kind of our generation, that like whenever I mention it to anybody, everybody's got at least one sketch they remember, one quote that they've been using forever. Like it really stands the test of time. And it's a shame that the music rights kind of dicked things up for as long as they did, like it's the same thing that happened to so many good shows. Like, you said you're from Cincinnati. WKRP had the same problem when they were trying to do home video.
Oh, did they? Oh, no. That makes sense.
Because they're the radio station and they were always just playing songs in the background. So, like, it's so weird.
Oh, man. And it was so beloved back in the day. And you're right. Like, you don't see it represented all that much anymore. Yeah. And, like, I think Beavis and Butthead had a terrible time with all that sort of thing as well. So, every time we talk about the possibility of reuniting, the good news is that I guess Paramount now owns all that stuff. And I think that they, have expressed, oh, yeah, if you guys ever reunite to do something like that, we'd be thrilled with that. And the reason I'm excited about that idea is that our sketch, we deliberately, like it was a very conscious decision that brevity is the soul of wit. We were very like annoyed with like SNL and Mad TV having like sketches that went on for 6 or 7 minutes. So a lot of our sketches like could with a little bit of editing be turned into TikToks and be reintroduced to a new generation. If push comes to shove with anything like that. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how realistic it is about us possibly reuniting, because we've got 11 different careers and lives, and there's still so much love between the group. I mean, we text each other. We have a ridiculous text thread all the time of total nonsense to this day. But there's still also that a lot of the dysfunctional family dynamics between us, where, you think to yourself, okay, it would be really, really fun to reunite and do, like, I don't know, 10 or 12 or whatever episodes. But it would also be like, oh my God, are all the old tensions and that gonna, the rivalries and whatnot. Oh, I don't know.
It's great.
All those patterns.
Yeah. I would love it if something like that happened. This is the worst segue ever, but let's rewind a little to you as a kid. Were you sometimes you just give up on it and you're just like, the segue's not there. I'm just gonna do it. Just take it by the horns.
Yeah. I heard Carlin do that. Last summer, I was listening to like all of Carlin's records and specials, and it was quite a trip to like what. Oh, it's because there was that documentary that came out on HBO. Sure. And I really got a kick out of it when occasionally he would be like, I don't do segues, so here's the next thing.
Yeah. Sometimes you just got to go for it. Were you a theatrical child? Were you like, as a kid? And
holy shit. Yeah. It's so funny. Like, so many of the stories that I tell on Risk and wherever I tell stories are about my childhood. For the longest time, I thought that the crux of my whole life story was the fact that I realized I was gay kind of at the beginning of being able to use language, but like I was well aware of what the words gay and fag meant by the time I was 5, and, was really terrified that I was, going to go to hell, and that if anyone found out, I'd be ostracized from my family and friends. And at the same time, I was having a hard time, like, trying, to pray the gay away and all that nonsense. But also, in my adulthood, I have been diagnosed with severe ADHD. And the more I learn about that, I'm like, oh my gosh, those two things together successfully made me feel like I am from another universe. I'm in another universe than everyone else. And there's a lot of like low key, low simmering trauma around feeling like that as a kid, and part of the result is becoming a comedian. Like the very first day of kindergarten, first of all, I remember waiting in line to go into kindergarten, a single file line to go into our classroom, and a kid pointed at me and started laughing. And I was like, oh my God, they're already like bullying me or making fun of me. And he said, why is your hair orange? And then another kid said, it's not orange, it's red like the head on the dick of a dog. And they're both laughing and everything. And I thought to myself in that moment, oh, thank God. They're not suspecting I'm gay. They're distracted by the hair.
Yes.
And then later that day, toward the end of the day, when it was time for a little nap, and remember, like, you would get like a little thing of milk and a cookie and take a little nap. And I started doing this little routine. The teacher had left a giant stapler of hers on my desk. And so we all have our heads down. And I saw across the room, there was this little girl who was able to see me with her head down. And I started motioning to her as if I was, it's kind of like a Buster Keaton or a Charlie Chaplin Lotsie, where I was acting like I was going to, like pound this stapler down on my thumb, like, whoop, and then would stop at the last minute. And she was dying. She was dying. And then it felt so good because it was like this eureka moment of, this is how I can charm people. And I can make people feel like, oh, he's weird, but weird in a way that we enjoy. You know what I mean? Like I knew they'd find out I was weird inside eventually. But if you can make people laugh at you on your own devices before they're laughing at you, for their own reasons, you're ahead of the game. So finally, I got so carried away that I fucking drove a staple through my thumb. I lost control of the bit. I drove a staple into my thumb, and then of course I was in trouble, and it was a whole thing. But it's funny, I really don't remember like the fallout. I don't remember like feeling like traumatized about being held back or whatever had to go down with my parents or whatever. But what I still remember, I've never forgotten how excited I was to have been like, I can make them laugh, And by the time I got to the first grade, on day one, the teacher said, "Oh, you're the class clown, huh?" And I had never heard that phrase before. And that was like a badge. She did not mean for it to be a badge of honor, sure, but that's how I took it. Yeah. So yeah, I was obsessed with records. Like the assumption in the family was that even among me, even with me, go into music because, oh my gosh, I was so obsessed with records before I could really even talk. My mom tells a story of going over to our cousin's house and just pointing at their stereo. Whenever we would go somewhere, she would be like, just give him some records and a record player and he'll be fine, and just listening. I remember there were certain records like the original not the original cast recording, but the original album project version of Jesus Christ Superstar and Free to Be You and Me and Meet the Beatles. There were so many records that were just took my mind in so many different directions when I was a kid that I was obsessed with it. And at one point I thought, who do I want to be when I grow up? I thought maybe Donny Osmond.
It's a good choice.
Because I used to watch like Sonny and Cher and Donnie and Marie. There were all those very musical variety shows back then, which we really don't have so much anymore. I think they still do have them in some other countries, but yeah, I was kind of in love with music. And then, when I was in the 7th grade, it was when I was 10 years old. So that would have been the 5th grade. My father, he really started to see, so I was one of 5 children, right? And my father had 2 passions, 2 hobbies that he was most obsessed with. Football, which my 2 older brothers loved as well, and opera, which literally no one in the family other than me would resonate with that, right? So he was like, oh my gosh, this one I can take to the opera, So when I was around about 7, he took me to an opera for the first time. And then when I was 10, for my 10th Christmas, he gave me Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And that was like earth shattering,
Sure.
I had known Meet the Beatles, like the original, their first record, the repackaging of it for the United States with the Beatles is the real name of it in Britain. But obviously Sgt. Pepper's is like from another universe than their first songs. So I just was like, got so immersed in that. And then in the 7th grade, I was in a screaming match with my older brother, Dave. he was listening to records upstairs. And my older brothers by that time had really gotten into the Dazed and Confused era. I mean, they had a killer stereo with huge speakers and just a ton of records. And my brother Dave, was just obsessed with Dylan. And I was in a screaming match with him. And Dylan was singing the song My Back Pages, which has the line, but I was so much old. Yeah, but I was so much older then. I'm younger than that now. And I yelled at my brother, and listen to this bullshit. Like, this guy's lyrics don't even make any sense. And even as the line was coming out of my mouth, I probably didn't say bullshit, I was so young. But even as the line was coming out of my mouth, I was like, wait a minute, that is an interesting, that is actually an interesting line. And so that's when I became completely obsessed with Dylan. I was not allowed in my brother's room, but whenever they were not around, I would go up there and listen to their records and then hunt around for their weed, not to smoke it, but just to be like, oh my gosh, they do this, So yeah, that was my musical upbringing. My father introducing me to all kinds of mostly classical opera, but also some very creative stuff like the Beatles, and my brothers with all that they were into. Yeah. And so, oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. Did you ever think about doing music? Was that ever a thought, or was it just?
Well, it's funny. In the 10th grade, I joined the boys' choir, and it was serious old church music. In fact, I went to the Royal School of Church Music boys' choir camp when I was 10 years old in Princeton, New Jersey, on the campus there. It was this Church of England, this Anglican, whatever, choir teaching academy would come over to Princeton in New Jersey on their campus and hold a little choir camp. And now, all these years later, I'm like, oh my God, I'm sure I think I've heard of incidents of boys being molested and stuff like that. So I'm like, oh wow, I was really I think that I was so aware of things that something like that couldn't happen to me, because we then went to New York City to perform at St. John's on the same block that MoMA is on, to perform. That was the end of choir camp, was to go to New York and perform at St. John's, or is it St. Thomas? I can't remember. But anyway, seeing New York City in 1980 was also just so stunning, because my choir director, the only place he could have us stay is with the former choir director who had taught at our school before, who had since moved to Chelsea and had a lot of very eccentric friends. So we're sleeping in this loft in Chelsea, and I remember Robert Love came over with his gigantic afro playing his funk music on the stair. All the cigarettes they were smoking smelled very weird. Everyone was wearing crop tops or these very tight white pants, and so I was very aware, as opposed to, I think, the other choir boys. I was like, oh, these men are gay, and I'm getting to see. And, it was really sad because, while I was in high school, I had lunch with my old choir director. And I said, hey, whatever happened to Robert Love and all those guys? And he was like, oh, they did not make it. He was like, that whole crew, was wiped out by the plague back then. So yeah, it was fascinating that I got this little glimpse into New York City in 1980, right before gay life in New York City became so hard for so many people. But that, I'll never forget it. That was a very special little window into that era. Yeah.
Was that the moment you knew that's where you wanted to go to school or to get away from? Or?
Yeah. Yes. Because I had seen in Time magazine, I think it was 1977 or 78, they had a edition of Time that was called The Homosexuals. And it was an image of two male hands holding. And there was an image inside a gay bar in that article where you could see a guy's butt. I guess he was a go-go dancer or something like that. And that had already planted into my mind, oh, I would go there at some point. And then, a couple of years later, there I was with the choir camp going there. And I was like, oh, yeah, I want to move here. So in high school, I became very into the musical theater. And it's funny, I was super lucky. I didn't know this was going to happen, but I was really blessed. And it's something to be grateful for because I was obsessed with the idea of going to the FAME school in Cincinnati, the School for Creative and Performing Arts. When I was around 8, the woman next door recognized, oh, I think Paul Allison is taking his kids to taking this kid to the opera. I have a free ticket to this show, The King and I, at the School for the Creative and Performing Arts. And I'm going to take my daughter and her best friend, but my daughter is sick. So I'll take the kid next door and my daughter's best friend, who happened to be Sarah Jessica Parker.
What?
So for one night only, I met Sarah Jessica Parker and sat next to her while watching The King and I at the School for Creative and Performing Arts, and was totally blown away by this play and absolutely knew at that time, okay, by the time I get to high school, I want to convince my parents I want to go to this school and I want to be in musicals like that one. Well, my parents steadfastly refused. I think my mother especially was like, no, you're going to get a Catholic education. So I went to a Jesuit high school, St. Xavier High School, which is an outstanding high school. And it's funny because I was so mad that they wouldn't let me go to the SCPA. And right as I'm going to high school, the SCPA has huge child molestation scandals, like multiple scandals. Like it kind of shut the school down for more or less for a while.
Oh my God.
Meanwhile, St. X had just hired this exceptionally talented, like radical envelope pushing lesbian drama teacher and theater director who was like, all right, first thing we're going to do is Bye Bye Birdie, only Birdie is Bowie.
That's cool. That's
so
a
yeah,
hot take.
I happen to have like this awesome high school theater experience, and so many kids out of there are now on Broadway, or Andy Blankenbuehler has all these Tony Awards for his choreography of all Lin-Manuel Miranda's stuff. And, it's just it was an extraordinary gift to be in that theater group. And then more or less the same thing happened when I went to NYU. It was a really tough decision. Should I go into theater? Should I go into acting or, movies? And I ultimately decided movies. And when I got to NYU, I was very daunted because it's that experience that you have where all of a sudden you've been told you're a genius by friends and family, when you're in a big fish in a small pond. And then you arrive at a place like the Tisch School of the Arts, and you're surrounded by kids from Paris and London and Berlin and whatever. And all, everyone else is like crazy rich. and and there was an incredibly male chauvinist, like basically the kids who thrived at NYU Film School were kind of dominant young men who wanted to be Scorsese and whose parents had all kinds of money to fund their film projects. So I immediately kind of was like, oh, wait a minute. I learned right away that with ADHD, like filmmaking, like I can't, like cinematography and stuff, I cannot deal with all those details. So I was very happy to realize, oh, you can still be in the film program, but focus on acting and writing. You can just take those classes instead. And so I did. And that's how I ended up meeting the members of the State, the sketch comedy group. And I really kind of stalked them. Well, first of all, because I thought Joe Latrulio was hot. Like, I literally just followed his ass down the hallways of school one day. And I was like, I had seen him at like first day of orientation. And I was like, whoa, that guy is so hot. And then one day it was like drop ad day. And I was like, oh my God, there's that boy again. And he dressed he was from Fort Lauderdale and he dressed very Miami Vice. Like this was 1988, right? And I don't know, I hadn't seen people dress that way really in real life. So I kind of hung outside the counselor's office to listen to what he was dropping and adding. And I heard that he was adding motion, matter, and meaning. Was that? Well, anyway, he was adding this particular Super 8 film course that freshmen could take. And I just went in, right after him and made sure I was going to be in a class with Joe Latrulio. Well, his first film project was all about his girlfriend. No. so I immediately learned that, there's no use in continuing to pursue Joe. But he and a couple other guys, Mike Jan was in that class. Ken Webb, who was an original member of the State, might have been in that class too. They loved my first movie, which is not about a girlfriend. It was just pure comedic silliness. And they invited me to come see this show, which was the new group's first show. And when I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, I want to get into that group. So I started kind of stalking all of them, like trying to get into everyone's classes that were in that comedy group. And by sophomore year, was hanging out with a bunch of them at this bar called The Dugout. No longer exists. It was like this punk rock bar in the East Village. And one night, I went into the bathroom, and it was kind of a thing of mine to be the guy who takes off all his clothes at a party. It had started in high school. And so I went into the bathroom, but I'd never done it in a pub, I'd done it at house parties, right? Not at a bar where you can be arrested. But I went into the bathroom, and as I'm taking off all my clothes in there, I realized, God, there's like an inch of urine water on the floor here. This is very difficult, like getting my boots off and putting them back on. This is terrible. And I had a pint of beer, and by the time I finally had the boots back on, but nothing else, I went out into the bar and lifted my pint of beer and improvised like a whaling song, like a sea shanty about how standing in an inch of urine well becomes the whaling man. Just it kind of walked around the bar like that, and then back into the bathroom and put my clothes back on before anyone could call the cops. And Carrie Kenny said to me, "You're crazy. You have to hang out with us more often." So I felt like that was really my first audition to actually become a member of the group, and it worked. It worked. I mean, what I initially became was the group's sound guy, which means the guy who presses the play button on the boombox or the cassette tapes that are queued up with, AC/DC or whatever to kick in.
So that's a long way to come, because like just a pivotal member of just such a brilliant troupe, like just like, and so many great characters and stuff like that, so many great sketches. How did you?
Totally.
So that all ends, and how does the pivot to storytelling occur? Because like, I think, like, as much as I admire you as a sketch performer and as a member of the state, I remember the first time I heard Risk, which was like one of the early podcasts that I ever listened to and stuff like that. And I was just blown away at kind of the space you created for people to just tell really, you know, kind of not weird tales, but like the tagline is, you know, tales that people don't normally tell. And it's just a really fascinating thing.
You know what happened? Yeah. You know, when we got hired onto MTV, when we got our own show, we would show up at 10 in the morning. That's when we decided the workday should start. And I was never very, you know, I have low self-esteem, stuff that I've had to work through my whole life just because of the way I grew up thinking of myself as a kid. So there were other members of the group who just had a hell of a lot more ego and had a hell of a lot more, I don't know, that kind of, you find it among so many comedians, that sort of like punching thing. It's the roasting sort of humor. And so there was a lot of, because it was an 11-member group, there was a lot of competition and a lot of trying to take one another down a peg in this or that way. And sometimes it could get really, really upsetting. And so one day I suggested, hey, why don't we start the workday with like just a half hour of going around the room and everyone saying how they're doing, what's going on in their lives otherwise, and so on. We can call it check-in. And it was immediately like the group was very relieved that we put that in place. It was very, very good for us. But it was very funny, too, because I was the member of the group who was most often not hanging out with the rest of the group at night. A lot of the members of the group were hanging out 24/7, you know, going out drinking or whatever after work. Whereas I was going off with my gay friends or to the sex clubs or the whole craziness of the kinky world and all that. And so Tom Lennon said one day, well, of course, Kevin came up with the idea for check-in because every check-in, he's got the most insane story to share. What the hell he was doing the night before. So it was really Michael Ian Black, who all throughout the time we were in the state was really encouraging me, you should get up on stage and tell some of that stuff yourself. And I was so fearful of that idea because I didn't really know how to be. I didn't know how to be. I knew how to be within the state. You know, I knew how to like be all these crazy, you know, larger than life sketch comedy characters. But I didn't know how to be normal. I didn't know how to be myself in front of an audience. And Black really was the one who had the insight of when we would shoot before a live audience, there are all those moments where, the prop broke, we've got to reset. And then the audience has to sit there for like 10 or 15 minutes while you fix that prop and reset everything and then get ready to shoot the sketch again. And what Black would do was grab a microphone and just start chatting with the audience in a charming, funny way. And he was teaching himself how to do stand-up. You know, he was just improvising. And that was really ballsy and really wise. And I used to look at him and be like, man, damn, how does he do that? So after the group broke up in 96, I went through a real belly of the whale period. It lasted about a decade of kind of becoming a little bit afraid of other comedians, having a lot of social anxiety around performers in general, having stage fright, moments of terrible stage fright, kind of getting way too immersed in survival jobs like catering in order to just keep a roof over my head. And so it was a real kind of lost decade, drinking way too much. It was a hard time. And I just didn't handle it all very well. When I talked about, because Maron, when I was on Mark Maron's podcast, he was especially curious about that period. And I was kind of, at the time, kind of speaking of myself as if I was blaming myself for it. And he's like, Kev, everyone deserves a lost decade. But what happened was I even tried to run away from the performing arts entirely around about 2000 when I was 30 years old. I thought, I'll just give up on acting and getting up on stage or anything like that, and I'll go into writing and book publishing and stuff like that. So I got myself like a 9-to-5 job at a small book publisher, and I even started taking classes at Hunter College to maybe get a master's in English and become like an English professor or something like that. And then about 4 years into that, which is miserable, I was clearly just missing performing, someone emailed me and said, "Hey, are you Kevin Allen?" Like some book editor was like, "Wait a minute, like I'm working on some other project entirely. Are you Kevin Allison of The State?" And I emailed back, yeah, I am. And she said, "Would you come to this little writing school I'm starting and teach a how to write sketch comedy class?" And I was like, "Sure, I'll give that a shot." I think this was about 2015. And I got in front of this class, and they're all like, I don't know, 20 years old, but they're big State fans, And standing in front of that class, I found that I could tell stories that some of which were very moving and heartfelt about how hard it can be to be a comedian sometimes. And some were kinky and ridiculous, like so many of my stories, like the stories I would tell at check-in, with the State. And, others were just very, I don't know, goofy or whatever. And I was like realizing that I could be all these different sides of myself standing in front of a room full of people. And that kind of lit the spark of me getting back on stage. So I started doing one-person solo shows, where I was playing these crazy characters again, but this time trying to show sides of myself in them. And in 2008, or I guess it was the beginning of 2009, I did a solo show. It was called F Up. It was 5 characters who had effed up their careers. So it was supposed to be, autobiographical. And I did it at San Francisco Sketch Fest. And Michael Ian Black was in the crowd, and it was a disaster. It was just a bad night. The tech wasn't working. There was no one in the audience. It was a disaster. And after the show, he said, I really think you should. He was just echoing what he used to say way back when. He was like, I think you should drop the act, get up on stage, and just tell your own true stories. And I said, I feel like I've been hearing that for years. I feel like a voice in my head has been telling me that for years, but it just feels too risky. And he said, if it feels risky, that's probably a good sign. You know what I mean? Like if you open up to an audience, they'll open up to you. So I thought to myself, okay, flying back to New York, I was thinking, what's the riskiest story I could attempt to tell? Because I'd never been to a storytelling show. I'd never been to the Moth or anything like that. But I figured, okay, yeah, I guess it's just like doing a set of stand-up, only it's a story. And I thought, well, I could tell the story about the first time I tried prostituting myself right before the state was hired by MTV. It's a comedy of errors. Turns out I was not very well cut out for that line of work. But I felt like it was just like so risky to be sharing about that, because a lot of people have such weird feelings about that. And this woman had this storytelling show at UCB Theater. Margot Lightman and Julia Rossi had a show at UCB in Chelsea. And they were all supposed to be stories about sexual situations. And I told Margot, yeah, I think I can tell a story about when I tried being a hustler. And she said, oh my God, yes, you have to. But then on the day of the show, a couple days later, I called her and I was like, I can't do this. And she was like, oh my God, why? I said, it just feels too risky. And she said, listen, that is great news. I said, what? Like, what did you overbook? She's like, no. This show is all sex stories. There's often a person who calls me the day of the show and says, oh, I can't do it. It feels too risky. She's like, that's going to be the person, if I can convince them to do it anyway, that's going to steal the show. So she convinced me and I tried it. And it was truly another eureka moment. I was so nervous because it was funny because I looked out at the crowd and I was like, oh my God, they all look like frat boys. It's like everyone looks very like the kind of people who are not going to be open to a story about prostituting myself. But every time I came to a part of the story, I was like, oh my God, this part sounds so gay, or oh God, I sound so Midwestern here, or any of those inner critic bullshit things that I normally use to psych myself out. People just kept leaning further toward me, like, oh, I can't believe he's being so real with us, and they loved it. And it did steal the show that night. And I walked away. I remember walking down 8th Avenue just feeling electrified that night. And I felt like, okay, I keep hearing this word risk. I was now aware that podcasts existed. And I thought, look, in these 10 years of The Belly of the Whale, I've recognized that doing small room theater only gets you so far. And if I create a show where I am forcing myself, because of the regularity of having to do it, to get up on stage night after night, despite my stage fright or whatever, and I make a podcast out of it so that it's reaching more people than a small room comedy show can, I might have an idea here, to have a show where people tell true stories they never thought they'd dare to share in public, stories where you're inviting the people to take a risk and step outside their comfort zone and kind of come out about something or another. And since my whole life had been this kind of obsession of, should I come out or should I not about this, that, or the other, I really felt like I had the aegis to be like the guy in front of all of that. And so really that night on 8th Avenue, the whole idea kind of crystallized in my head. And that's when I started creating the show. And it was funny because I came to it with the same philosophy the state used to have, which was, we taught ourselves sketch comedy. And then the guys from the state who created Reno 911, they had never taken an improv class before. And they were like, we're going to teach ourselves improv on TV. So I was like, I'm going to teach myself storytelling by putting out a storytelling podcast. And that's how it worked. And I had realized from doing the sketch comedy workshop that, years prior, that you learn so much better when you're teaching as well. You know what I mean? Like that really helps your conscious and subconscious come together with all that stuff. And so I started producing Risk and teaching storytelling classes. So I just became totally immersed in storytelling. And, I didn't have I had funny, kinky stories mostly at first, right? So I didn't have stories about serious trauma, like people started coming to me because they felt like I was such a friendly, honest person who was willing to talk about stuff that might make some people uncomfortable. So people would come to me with stories about child molestation or murder in the family or stuff like that. And I mean, I was very, from the beginning, I was like, I want anything like that. But, I mean, that too was quite a learning process of realizing, oh my God, yeah, I'm a little bit of a therapist now too. I have to be able to like responsibly shepherd people through what is not exploitative, but is as supportive as I can be, There were several cases early on where I was like, oh my God, let me tell you what, like the first person who shared a child molestation story with me, she was really crying and I was crying, and it just, felt very, very raw. And I said to her, listen, I'm just going to give you this recording and you take as much time to decide to listen back to it or not. And if you want to revisit it, or whatever, just get back in contact with me. And a couple of weeks later, she was like, I would like to do a second recording session. I mean, we can use some of this one, but let's get it a little bit more, let's finesse it a little bit. And we did. And when we put that out, I was like, wow, okay, we're really doing something with this, because that's when people started writing in, oh my God, this changed my life, or this got me into therapy, or this got me off of heroin, or, like all these emails coming in about the show being profoundly meaningful to people. And so I realized early on, okay, the money situation might be insane because at first I was just like running up credit cards to do this thing.
Oh, I know it well. Yeah.
But I was like, oh, okay. Hearing that from people really fueled me to be like, all right, let's make this work. And also early on, I realized that you can call out to the audience. Hey, is anyone good at business? Is anyone good at this or that? And that, the whole Risk team formed over the years from people hearing me ask for this or that and saying, oh my gosh, I'm in love with the show and I'd love to help out in this way or that. And eventually that's how we put together a team. I mean, I think everyone on the team is someone who fell in love with the show at some point. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been a fan since the very first time I listened to it. And like you said, it started the way that it started and what it's become is just beautiful to me. I mean, like the just wide swaths of types of stories you'll find. I'm an acquaintance with Rich Monahan, who told the grapefruit story, which is just incredibly hilarious. You can have something like that, and then there's just incredibly horrifyingly sad stories about I forget who the storyteller was who talked about repeatedly stabbing her mother. The kind of spectrum that you've created, that people have that kind of safe space to tell these stories, and not just tell them, but to listen to them, because it is like a two-way thing. Like there is a receiver that kind of needs that stuff sometimes too.
Oh my gosh. Yes. I remember, some people go by a pseudonym, a fake name, which I'm perfectly fine with, because, my feeling is you're not necessarily here to give us some sort of journalistic or court of law accuracy. You're here to share your interpretation of your real life experience, and so, I'm very proud of some of those stories that have come from people who, I mean, we've had a lot of well-known people do the show, Trevor Noah and Margaret Cho, and just a ton of people, Bowen Yang, lots of good folks have been on the show. But a lot of stories have come from people who are like, have never done anything like it before, like have never like spoken publicly about or spoken publicly, period, So it's really been an honor to work with some of those folks. There was a woman who told a story on the show, Marcy Langlois. Her story was about how when she was, I think, 17 years old, she was in a car accident. It really wasn't her fault. Like, these were three very elderly folks in this car who probably whoever was driving shouldn't have been driving, right? And the car accident killed those three people, So at 17, all of a sudden, she had been in this accident that left three people dead. And when I can't remember how she came into our orbit, but I do know that she had shared about the incident at some sort of like, I don't know, some sort of mental health conference or something like that. And I said to her, I can totally help you shape this story. And I want you to know it doesn't have to happen. I mean, you can work on it and then decide not to. And it can take as much time as it takes. So she sent me like a first draft of like, maybe the first 15 minutes of a story or something like that. And I gave her some positive feedback. And then she needed to take like a year and a half or so off, and then came back and started working with us again. And the ultimate result is a story called Surrender. And it might be almost an hour long, maybe not quite that long, but oh my gosh, it's stunning. It's absolutely stunning. And she needed to record it alone. Normally a person is telling the story to me or to now one of our editors or coaches on the team. But she was like, no, I think I just need to be in my backyard with the crickets and then the birds chirping. And I'm like, I don't care. I don't care about the crickets and the birds. Just talking almost to like some sort of archetypal therapist in her head or something like that. And I was like, yeah, you do you. And it took a long time for it to all come together, but I was so thrilled when it finally did. It's such an honor to be able to do that with people,
Yeah. And, I also think like almost like a form of therapy, like some of the notes that you use for storytelling are things that help people unlock things that they might not have. Like I made mention last week on the episode that that you guys have selected me to perform in April at Caveat. And working on the story that the audience doesn't know about yet, and I'm going to save it as a for the show. I don't want to spoil anything here. I've always looked at parts of this story through everybody else's eyes because I was always worried about like everybody else's voice, and just some of the notes and some of the tips and techniques, I started to like, oh, wait a minute, this is like my story. This is about me. And I found myself like literally sitting in tears writing notes, but like not sad tears, just like, and the only other time I ever experienced something like that was, much like you, I was diagnosed with ADHD. All right. But for me, I only found out like 2 or 3 years ago or something like that. And I was reading this book, Driven to Distraction by Dr. Ned Hallowell. And I'm like reading things in there that like I just never would have even thought were ADHD traits. I just thought they were, I'm a procrastinator, I'm broken, or something like that. And I remember like reading people's comments about like, you know, relationship issues and stuff like that, just in tears, like, oh my God, there's a reason for this? Like, holy shit.
Yeah.
Like, and that's what I got from kind of working through the storytelling notes. Like, it's really just an awesome technique, not just for a podcast, but for kind of understanding yourself better.
Yeah, I'll tell you something, because I was only diagnosed in 2019, and I don't know. I just didn't know about very much about it at that time as well, and continue to learn about it. And what's been fascinating for me is that some of my stories I've now revised, because I now have a new understanding of what my mind was, how my brain was reacting to things, you know, that helps make the story make new sense for me. And then there are other cases. There's my story. It's called Man at Hawaii, about when I went to Peru when I was 17 years old. I went to this Jesuit high school, and this Jesuit priest had kind of like, you know, encouraged me to go on this sort of like a mission trip of like building a school for, you know, children living in dire poverty on the outskirts of desert outskirts of a city down in Peru. And, you know, it was a, you know, life-changing experience. But when I put the story together, I mean, I knew the key incident that I wanted to focus on. I had like seen, I had been standing in front of this man who was clearly dying, who was clearly starving to death. And then I kept being like haunted by like a vision of him, you know, like as if I was, as if he was haunting me. And I wrote this story about it. And actually, it's also a story of like a moment in my life where clearly the universe was telling me you're a storyteller, but I didn't, you know, like it takes a while. Oftentimes, you know, you have to learn lessons over and over again until they totally crystallize for you. But anyway, in putting the story together, I was like, wait a minute, at plot point A, here's the Jesuit priest, and then B, here he comes again to point me in a slightly different direction, and then C, here he comes again, and then in the end, he's at the very end of the story too. Now I know that my mother and that priest were, because she was so unhappy about me being gay, and this priest was your classic in the closet gay priest, that they were kind of conspiring for me to be groomed to become a Jesuit.
Oh, geez.
And so what originally to me was just this like really lovely story about these realizations I had in Peru, I'm like, oh my God, there's another story.
Yeah.
There's another story happening in the structure of that story. So you can do stuff like that and have great revelations. There's a story I told on Risk way back when, in the earliest days, about almost drowning in the Colorado River for some reason. Like, here's a very ADHD thing, like a bunch of friends running into the river rapids of the Colorado River, and like they're very athletic, you know, extremely athletic, and swimming across, and me being like, well, sure, never having had a swimming lesson. Why don't I give that a shot?
Good time to figure that out. Yeah, sure.
So in the story, I call myself an idiot over and over and over again. And I played it for my now therapist, because I wanted to revisit that story to see what can I learn from that story now. And he said, you know, this happened like 25 or so years ago, and you're still calling yourself an idiot throughout the whole thing. You have compassion for everyone in that story except for yourself. And that was kind of a mind-blowing moment. You know, I mean, here's a story that has been on Risk, and now I feel like, oh, I should definitely retell that one and acknowledge that aspect of it, like dig into that.
Yeah,
So
unlocking.
yeah, I think they're always evolving.
Yeah, unlocking those things is like so. It's almost like it was there all along, and all it took was a little story. So you guys are bringing Risk to Philadelphia, which will be this Thursday, March 2nd at World Cafe Live. Which have you ever been to the World Cafe? It's a great room.
Yeah. Yes. I think I've been there. I think we've done Risk there a couple of times, and I especially have fond memories of the last time we did it because Tracy Segarra told a story there that was so moving, and it was about her relationship with her then daughter, but who is now non-binary, I think, and her daughter came to her after the show and said, I didn't like some of the way you told that story. I didn't think that, I didn't feel like you were getting some of it right. And I was so like, it was one of those moments where I said to Tracy, that's remarkable. Can you retell it then in another context and like work through that with your family? And she did. And it was also in the Risk book. So I always remember that moment of being like, wow, that was really emotionally intelligent for a teenager to express some of the insights they had about the story that night and how that story ended up transformed. Because I was that night in Philadelphia at World Cafe Live, I was like, oh, fuck, are you kidding? We're not going to be able to run that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the producer hat comes on real quick, doesn't it? Yeah.
But it ended up making it even better.
That's so great. What's the lineup looking like for this show? A lot of good stories, or well, obviously.
Oh my gosh, this was kind of like one of those. What did they call it? Like the feast where there was too much to choose from. So we have a lot of people who pitched for this show that we're also going to try to do radio style stories with. But yeah, we have a remarkable story about like a phone sex sort of scenario. That's it. We've had a couple of those, but never one that gets as like intimate and emotional as this one does. That we have a story that goes into like the marrying for a green card. I guess I didn't realize that there's an entire like industry for that. I mean, of course there is, but yeah, like, so it's this very like, there's a lot of intrigue and mystery. There's a lot of suspense in this show where there's like twists at the end. There's a therapy. There's a bad therapy story. There's like a story about a therapist who was not within the boundaries that a therapist should be in. And then there's a remarkable story from an Arab American reporter who spent a lot of time in Iraq and Afghanistan, and all that he had to witness and just all the tremendous irony that he was always facing around his identity of being from America, but having family over there, and just like, what a mind fuck it was for him. Yeah. So yeah, these are going to be like, and then I'll tell, I'm going to tell a story that is exactly what we were just talking about. Like something that happened to me when I was in college at film school that now I have a totally new understanding of, because of knowing how my brain works now.
It's awesome.
It's gonna be really great.
I had pitched actually for this show. It was kind of what got me off my ass about it. Because I had this whole other story idea, and it was I'll be 100%. It was garbage. It was just that I wanted to pitch something, and then the story that happened, like literally, I got the results to the story without spoilers the day before pitches were due, and I was like, oh God, this is the story. Oh no, like I was like it snuck up on me. So like it was completely like I was like, oh no, I know what I have to tell. And my fiance was like, she was like, pitch this. Like, this is what you need to pitch. This is what you need to work through.
That's amazing. That's great.
But yeah, I'm very excited for this show. I love seeing this stuff live. Do you prefer doing the radio version or the live version? Like what do you think kind of fosters a better experience?
You know, it's interesting because the live experience is, you know, it's really funny. I love telling stories about nights when things went haywire in the way that only live theater can. Like 3 different people have fainted at Risk live shows before because of the story content. There have been other times where, you know, someone like did actually have a little bit of a meltdown up on stage. And then there have been times, you know, like one of the most famous times is the time a fella got up in Seattle and he said, well, Kevin told me I was supposed to go with my therapist's interpretation of what happened here and tell you I did not have sex with aliens from outer space, but I'm here to tell you I had sex with aliens from outer space. And the audience was just jaw dropped, and I'm in the wings like, oh, okay. It ended with Jesus, Buddha, and Ramtha, which is there's a whole cult around this entity called Ramtha, informing him that yes, his story was the real deal. So
yes, the surprise of live. Yeah, I guess you can't recreate that in a radio show.
Yeah, but I do love the radio stuff as well. I do love, there's a different kind of intimacy with the radio style stories, because, well, sometimes a person is just a lot more willing to say really hard stuff in a more private setting. So yeah, I wouldn't trade either, you know?
Sure.
In fact, we're thinking that because we're still in this era where live theater is all live theater, it doesn't matter if it's classical music or going to the movies or whatever, is still in a slightly wonky place, which seems to have to do with adaptation, people getting so used to their huge new entertainment systems that they bought during the pandemic or during the lockdown. People just being used to like not going out to theater. So we don't know if we're still in that or if we've gotten through that hump, because we're now thinking, well, you know, it would be kind of fun to like this summer try having like backyard around a fire sort of like campfire kind of story, you know, where recording live shows but in much more intimate settings, and seeing what that sounds like, because you know we don't necessarily need the live shows to make money. You know, the money we make is mostly in other ways. Our school, we teach a lot of corporate workshops, and of course the advertising for the podcast. So we're trying to get creative and experiment with how we might do live experiences. But then you never know. Like it might come like, oh no, all theater seems to be completely back to normal, and we'll just be like, oh well, you know, nothing beat. Like we did the San Francisco show in the beginning of February. And it was a big theater, a very full house, and just a spectacular show. So maybe I'm being silly, and we'll be back to normal.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Well, at this time, would you like to go through the Jauntlet? These are my stock questions that I ask every guest just to gauge what I think their likes are and to get to know them better. The first section is the one-hit wonders. The first one, Billy Joel or Elton John?
Oh my God. Elton John, definitely. I go back to a lot of his early 70s stuff all the time. Honky Cat, I love especially. A lot of his old stuff just sounds so great,
Yeah.
And Billy Joel is the first concert I ever saw at Riverfront Stadium in Cincinnati. So I have some appreciation for him, and I'm always in his backyard when I am on my friend's boat. I have a friend who has a boat in Oyster Bay.
Oh, okay.
It just happens to be docked across the river or whatever it is, the bay from Billy Joel's house. So we're always, what's going on over there?
That's so cool. Number 2, Debbie Harry or Joan Jett?
Oh, I would have to say Debbie Harry. I love Joan Jett, but I feel like Debbie Harry. I feel like Blondie is so like key and fun and interesting. Like that weird way that CBGB's scene. Like one of the things I love about the CBGB scene is I've never liked the Ramones. So I love the fact that Talking Heads had the philosophy, let's sound like anything other than the Ramones.
Yeah.
That was their only guiding philosophy. And because everyone else was trying at CBGB's was trying to sound like the Ramones. But then Blondie was another one of those bands where it's like, okay, I guess you're kind of disco a little
Yeah.
bit. Yeah. So, I appreciate her for that.
I heard recently that Joey Ramone once admitted that what the Ramones were trying to do was be the Bay City Rollers, and now I can't listen to the Ramones without hearing Saturday Night. Like it's it's rock and roll radio, rock and roll. It's SATUR. It's so fascinating.
Very, very funny. That's awesome.
Yeah, it made me appreciate
God.
them in a whole different light. Like it's kind of like the storytelling unlock. Like once I found that key, I was like, oh my God, this is so right there in your face.
That's great.
Number 3, Aretha Franklin or Tina Turner?
Oh my God. I feel like that one is oddly, I feel like, well, I would have to just flat out say Aretha, right? Aretha, I feel like is more like soul, and I feel like Tina is more like rock and R&B, but yeah, I have my Aretha story. At my lowest point, when the state was still in reruns on MTV, but I was unemployed because we were no longer working at MTV. That's when I was catering, and I was catering at the Grammy Awards in the VIP room, pouring champagne at this little bar. And Aretha starts to walk into the room with her giant, like gown and all that sort of thing. And Sarah McLachlan happened to be walking through the door at the same time, and then realized, oh shit, my God, I'm walking right next to Aretha. And she went, oh my God, Aretha, can I get you a glass of champagne? So they walk up to the bar. And then Sarah McLachlan looks up at me and clearly recognizes me from the MTV show. And she says, without thinking, she said, oh my God, what are you doing?
Oh no.
And Aretha looks at her like, huh? And she says to Aretha, oh, he's a very successful comedian. And Aretha just raised her eyebrow and looked at me and said, mm-hmm.
Oh my God.
So I've just always loved that as like definitely like a lowest moment, but at the same time, amazing,
That's tremendous. That is absolutely tremendous. Oh God. The next one, Nirvana or Pearl Jam?
Oh, definitely Nirvana. I was the only member of the state who turned down the opportunity to be there at Nirvana Unplugged.
Oh my
everyone
God.
was like, yeah. Everyone was had a free ticket to be there, and I don't know what I was thinking. I just thought, oh, there'll be so many occasions where I can see Nirvana, and there was some sort of gay sex party happening that night, which in retrospect, no, there's always an occasion to go to a gay sex party. I wasn't thinking with my brain, but no, I, as time has passed, I've become even more appreciative of, especially like the attitude of, oh, I don't know. They were so, embracing of, feminism and queer people. It was just a kinder, gentler, it kind of changed a lot. And then it was so disappointing that by the time that like Woodstock 99 came around, it felt like all of that, I don't know, innocence or whatever of the early 90s was very, very lost,
Yeah.
But yeah, I still have so much fondness for all of that.
It's beautiful. Janis Joplin or Stevie Nicks?
Oh, definitely Janis. I don't know exactly what it is, but I've just never been a Stevie person. I do love Fleetwood Mac, but I've just never been a Stevie Nicks person. Here in New York, we have the queer community has Night of 1,000 Stevies. And it's funny because I didn't realize you don't have to come dressed as Stevie. And two friends of mine did something brilliant. It's a couple of friends of mine. The one happens to look a lot like Lindsey Buckingham. Oh. And so he put on like a big, mid 70s afro and all that. And the other can easily dress up to look like Stevie Wonder. So they went as those two and were, well beloved to be like, two of the few people who weren't wearing a bunch of scarves.
Scarves, yeah, sure. That's awesome. That is so awesome. The big one, the cliche one, Beatles or the Stones?
Definitely the Beatles. I realized when Get Back came out, the Peter Jackson documentary from the Christmas before this past one, where it's like 9 hours of you watching them work on what became the album Let It Be. I realized that as a kid, that is exactly what I was always wondering. I would hear a song and be like, oh, wow, I wonder if it was raining that day. And were they joking around? Or, how long did it take to do this? And, that documentary totally shows you all that. And I normally hate Peter Jackson's tendency to make everything 9,000 times longer than it has to be.
Yeah.
But in this case, when he was like, oh, I'm thinking of releasing an 18-hour version of that documentary, I'm like, I think I would be tempted to watch that too.
100%. Like, just watch it. Like, being able to watch geniuses create, like, we don't have Beethoven, film footage of Beethoven crafting symphonies and stuff like that. But being able to, like, everybody talks about it. But when Paul sits there with that bass and just starts coming up with Get Back, like, it's watching inspiration in its creation is just like unbelievable. Yeah. Absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah.
The final one-hit wonder, Bohemian Rhapsody or Stairway to Heaven?
I'm going to have to say Bohemian Rhapsody. It's funny because a friend of mine has a very don't know, very literal way of listening to music. And she's a lot younger. And she was exposed to some of Elton John's music and to Queen's music at the same time. And she's very straight edged, has never done a drink or a drug. And she was like, why at this point in the early 70s, like, why did the lyrics not have to make any sense? Like, what do you have to be on drugs to understand that stuff? And I was very disturbed by that because I was like, no, when I was a kid, I was totally into all this stuff and I wasn't doing drugs yet, you know? But no, yeah, Bohemian Rhapsody is really fun and I use it all the time for storytelling teaching because whenever someone is monotone, a lot of people have the problem of either being monotone or of not knowing how different scenes in a story or different sequences in a story, you need to kind of shift gears a little bit in order to get into the emotional vibe of this part of the story that you're now transitioning into. A lot of people just have a tendency to just talk the same way all throughout, same pace, same pitch, same rhythm. And so I'll use that song, Bohemian Rhapsody, as like an example, or I'll use a driving, like imagine you're going up a hill and then coming down fast and then making a sharp turn and then slowing down and, all that kind of thing. Because that song is so bonkers that way. And also, I guess I probably appreciated it too because there was that weird opera thing in it. And then I was, all around that as a kid. Stairway to Heaven, like, I appreciate Led Zeppelin for sure. But one of my favorite anecdotes is Dylan. There are so many hilariously ridiculous Dylan anecdotes, but there's the one of it's like 1974 and they're at some sort of, I don't know, bunch of rock stars or somewhere, and a guy comes up and shakes Bob's hand and he's like, "Hey Bob, I'm the manager of Led Zeppelin." And Bob pulls his hands away and he says, I don't come to you with my problems, man.
Oh, it's brilliant. Brilliant, Bob. I love it. Well, yeah, I'm kind of the same way. Like I like Led Zeppelin and I respect them a lot, but I also think that they're easily one of the most overrated bands of all time. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean like the legend of Led Zeppelin seems to supersede the material they created, but I recognize their influence and stuff. But yeah, Queen, I was a Queen guy all day, all night. Like that's it for me.
Yeah. I always say, do you know the Mud Shark song by Zappa?
Yes.
About Led Zeppelin. Yeah. That story is insane.
I've been waiting for that, like, to come back as like how are we not revisiting a lot of these rock stories in all of the change in tenor and stuff like that? Like that one, and everybody knows about it. Like it's not a secret, like
right. Yeah, it has been. Well, do you remember when Chrissy Hine revealed that she had kind of been, I guess, kind of sort of raped in a sort of a situation or in a rapey situation? And it was, I think she wrote a biography about, I regret that I put myself in that situation. And he was kind of a dick to have done that to me, but like, like not really blaming, like just feeling like it was kind of a crazy time or something like that. And people got really pissed off at her for not talking about her experience in the way they wanted to hear it. And we get that at risk a lot, where especially if it's a child sexual situation, a child and an adult, well, or like a teenager and adult, anything where someone's under the legal age, where there are incidences where a person is like, well, actually, I am not traumatized. You know what I mean? And I have to, as the host of the show, I'll come on after a story like that and say, hey, you might have been through a very, very closely identical sort of experience and totally have every, right to, feel traumatized and have a different perspective and all that sort of thing. But I really have to respect when a person has their own perspective. The thing came out about Bowie, sleeping with a 16-year-old girl or something like that. And her take was, are you kidding?
Right. Right.
She was like, no, I loved it.
Yeah.
So, everyone's different, I guess. Yeah, but no, I totally agree with you. It'll be fascinating. I was so mind blown to find out that Peter Yarrow of Peter, Paul and Mary, I think at least twice was caught with girls like 13 or something like that. That is, just there's no, forgiving for that. I feel
sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just beyond the pale.
And it's weird how hyper focused people will get on certain stories when there is, it was rampant for a while, and I know you can't try everybody at the same time and stuff like that, but it's weird that, like I said, the things that we know that are in, common jokes, like the mud shark story, where it's no, we all know it. It's not a secret. But
yeah. And I think you're right that the context of what a particular personality, like Peter, Paul and Mary, it that was another group that I didn't list from when I was really young. I listened to a lot of their stuff. It's just so hard to think of them.
Yeah.
They're just so pure, early 60s folk, they just seem so innocent and I think it's still really good in a lot of ways as representative of all that. But yeah, ooh, I think a lot of people just tried to ignore that one for years,
Yeah.
And but then there are cases like that one, or where it's just, more comes out and eventually it's okay.
Yeah, the well breaks and yep. Yeah. The second half of the Jauntlet here, this is the top 10 countdown. As I told you in email, Philly Jawn can mean anything you want it to be. So the number one, what was your first Jawn? What was the first thing you were obsessed with as a kid?
Well, that always brings to mind my story of when I was 3.5 or 4, somewhere in there. I found this little Hummel. Well, it wasn't Hummel, but it was a figurine of a kid about my age, like a toddler in a onesie, and the back trap of his onesie had opened up. He's crawling around and you can see his butt. It's supposed to be cute. You can still find these things all over the place. It's like the archetypal, I don't know, whatever.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was the most wonderful thing I had ever seen. At that age, what I knew to call that was Heine. We used the word Heine for butt. And I just ran around the house like a maniac, like Paul Revere, just yelling at everyone. So yeah, that was definitely where one gets one's beginnings sort of story.
It was all seated right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Number two, what's your current Jawn? What are you into right now?
Oh my God. The answer would definitely have to be hypnosis, hypnotherapy. I first hypnotized someone when I was in the 6th grade, just because I saw someone do it on television and then ran to the library and got a book about it and then tried it with a friend. And it was, I actually got a terrible ab reaction out of this person. She was another sixth grader. It was after school, just a bunch of kids hanging out. And we were always doing that kind of shit, like choking each other out or, poking pop rocks, like. But I hypnotized this gal and just took her like on a little imaginative, like walk on a beach or something like that. And then when she came out, she couldn't feel her left leg, like had no feeling or ability to move her left leg. And we were all like, oh, come on, Carolyn, come on, you're kidding us. And she was like, no, I'm not kidding. And we pulled her up and said, well, just walk it off. It probably fell asleep. And she fell down and she started screaming. She was like freaking out. And all my friends were like, we've got to call an ambulance. And I was freaking out. Then I like thought, okay, maybe I can like hypnotize her again and bring life back to the leg like Jesus or something. Right. And that did work. And God only knows it really might have been that it just fallen asleep. But it did leave me with the impression of, there's something to this. And so, over there's the story, Kevin Goes to Kink Camp is probably my best known episode of Risk of me telling a story. It's a pretty long one where I go to this kink camp when I was in my early 40s and kind of experience all this crazy BDSM kink stuff happening. But at some point that weekend, I went to a erotic hypnosis workshop. The great thing about those camps is, you're there for like 4 or 5 days and you can take all these workshops. And after a while, you're just like, instead of like stuff that you're really, hot for or whatever, eventually you're just like, I'll go to that one, but like, that sounds weird, you don't think you're going to do anything with it. So I went to this erotic hypnosis workshop, and it was with this gal that I had just met. We were sitting next to each other and we were like, oh my God, I wonder if the teacher will like have hired an actor to pretend they're being hypnotized, like stage hypnosis or something like that. And when the teacher did get a volunteer and hypnotize them, the gal next to me slumped over into my lap, and the teacher was like, oh shit, and was like tending to her because and so that was the second time in my life where I was like, oh my God, there's something to this. So I became kind of like obsessed with studying it in the most affordable ways I could, from like online courses and stuff like that. And finally, a good friend of mine, a wealthy woman who just like gets a kick out of me, she was like, I'll pay for you to take a real certification course. And so I'm taking this course this year. It's a year-long thing, but it might take longer. It's the sort of thing where you can keep going with it. That's taught by a Buddhist monk in the northern mountains of Thailand. And he teaches it over Zoom. And so by the end of the year, I might be certified in hypnotherapy, which I have no idea exactly. It's kind of like when I created Risk, I realized we tend to like learn things along the way without necessarily knowing how they're all going to come together. And so I figured this is one of those things where I'm like, I'll being able to use this in various ways, but I might not even know what they are yet, So yeah, I'm just it's kind of a hobby and a fascination right now.
That sounds cool. That sounds really cool. And sounds like the kind of tool that in kind of helping someone unlock something would be enormous.
Yes, it's Ericksonian hypnotherapy, which is all about story and narrative and stuff like that. So it's kind of in line with like Jung and Joseph Campbell and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it feels very related.
Very cool. Number 3 is first concert, but you said Billy Joel. So number 4, what was your last concert? What was the last live show you went to?
Oh gosh. Well, it was John Waters.
Oh,
Well, I mean, that's not that. Okay, that wasn't you mean a music
no,
concert?
that absolutely counts.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah. It was funny. I saw him Sunday night. A friend invited me, and I said sure. I had no idea he even did this, but he does stand up basically. And I don't know how old he is. He's pretty old, but he had enormous amounts of energy and seemed healthy as all get out. And he's not exactly like, I don't know, the hippest, contemporary stand-up comedian or whatever, but it was quite a kick, with all of his references to his old movies and stuff like that. So it was really enjoyable. He's kind of a hero too. His especially his old movies are just so endlessly insane.
yeah. I mean, like the ability he had and still has to make really bizarre things cool is something I've always admired. Like I've always loved, like telling the story of the weirdest, the freaks, us, of my people.
Oh, totally.
Like,
yeah. A friend of mine is writing a biography of him. She's a very prominent like sex educator and member of the kink community, and she had some sort of book deal where they wondered if she wanted to write a biography of someone because she's a writer, and she chose Waters in particular because she said, I think it's important to show the younger generation how the prior generation, especially of queer folk, were like pushing the envelope in ways that would not be considered politically correct today, but were important. Like when you hear rumors that kids are offended by Walk on the Wild Side for it exoticizing, and the importance of giving the context around things, but also just the spirit of being a little bit more able to joke about stuff. There was that play on Broadway. It was a queer playwright, and it was envisioning the people in Shakespeare's play Titus Andronicus, his first play, when Shakespeare was super young, and apparently he wanted to impress everyone with like what a hetero tough kind of young writer he could be, because it's just like nothing but murder left and right. It's the most brutal of all his plays. And so someone wrote a play, and Nathan Lane was in it several years ago, of the janitor and the clown who were working around Titus Andronicus, having to clean up all the corpses. And the playwright expressed, as queer people, we have to be able to continue laughing about really awful shit, facing like terrible crises and stuff like that, but still having a sense of humor. You know what I mean? And I think writing a biography of John Waters is a good way to preserve that sort of thing.
Absolutely. Number 5, what was your favorite concert? What was the best live show you ever saw?
Oh, this is going to sound crazy because it's a movie. I did see David Byrne's American Utopia. Was that what it's called? Yeah. Wherein he did a lot of talking heads. But when I was probably 15 or so when Stop Making Sense came out, and it was at this art theater in downtown Cincinnati that encouraged the audience to dance, to like get up from your seats and dance if you wanted to. And I remember seeing that, and then very shortly thereafter seeing Laurie Anderson's Home of the Brave. And both of those movies totally lit me up about how creative and alive and dynamic live music making could be in the 1980s. Because, I think we grew up, with older kids being like, the 70s suck. It was so much better. Everything was so much better in the 60s. And then when the 80s came around, it was like, the 80s sucked. Things were better in the, it's always that attitude. And now I have like a lot of new appreciation for a lot of the stuff that was being done in the 80s that at the time I might have like, been like, well, of course, the golden era was years ago, now realizing, oh, I couldn't help but love Prince.
Right.
Even though I was told that wasn't cool.
100%. 100%. Number 6, who have you never seen live that you wish you could have? They can be living or dead.
Oh, gosh. Now, does that have to be a musician too?
No. Any kind of performance, I think.
Gosh, that is such a good question. I mean, it's very funny to have like these, to think of Carl Jung to start off, just because like that would be so weird and it might be very awkward. Like I always think when you think of, like, for example, Jesus is another one where I always think, given the chance to meet that person, how weird would it be? Because you'd probably be sitting there with probably like a strange, homeless, like Palestinian person from the first century who wouldn't fit any of the any of the mythic imagery, and would not understand your language and all that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, I guess it would have really been something to have seen, like, for example, John Lennon. Like, that would have been really something to have been in a room with him performing,
Definitely. Number 7, what about an unappreciated Jawn? Something that you feel like doesn't get enough respect?
Well, I love movies that, I love art movies, but sometimes it's the ones that are so bizarre. Like the two that I'm thinking of right off the top of my head, because I've just seen them recently, are the Japanese movie House from 1977. In English, it's just House, which is truly one of the most insane things I've ever seen in my life. And I mean, I think that the filmmaker realized it was insane. He admits that he took most of his story ideas for the film from like his 9-year-old daughter. But it's funny because it kind of points to how outrageously creative Asian cinema has kind of always been, and which now we're just totally coming around to fully appreciating. Like the amount of creativity in a movie like Parasite, for example. I think you can see the beginnings of some of that in some of these little bizarro, I think they call it the new wave, the Japanese new wave of like the 70s. Yeah, it's not an insane movie, but there's a movie called In the Realm of the Senses, which is super, 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 super duper kinky. The two lead actors, a woman and a man, are naked and fucking throughout the entire movie, basically. But it's a true story and really beautifully done. And if you're not kinky, you might be a little traumatized by it, but but yeah, no, and there are a lot of those movies of the 70s in general, like are so bold. Even that movie Salo by Pasolini is, a lot of people consider it the hardest movie ever to watch. Again, very kinky, but in a not consensual way.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of those experimental kind of movies of the 70s I just love.
Brilliant answer. Number 8, what's your favorite album?
Oh gosh, that's impossible to answer because even when I was a kid, I was kind of on random, and when I say on random, I mean picking up the needle, putting it on another, I would just have a tendency, if there was something that was especially compelling to me and pulling me through, like Jesus Christ Superstar or something, where it's like, oh my God, wait, what's going to happen next? Then I, would definitely become obsessed with the whole album or Sgt. Pepper's or whatever. But my tendency was to get stuck on a song and replay that. And then if a song didn't speak to me very much the first time I heard it, to start skipping that one and to just always be putting other records on. And so I've kind of always been listening to music in random. And when we started Risk, I was determined to be using a lot of indie music. This was 2009 when we started, and it was a really nice era for indie music at that time. And so it was really fun for me to be online all the time, like looking through indie music lovers lists of songs to check out month to month, new singles or whatever that had come out from bands you'd never heard of. And so I was really proud of the music curation of the show back in the day. I mean, I still am, but I'm a little bummed because now we get these random corporations threatening to shut us down for running this or that. You know what I mean? So now we used to put out these best of Risk music compilations where you could hear the entire songs in mixes. I've always been a huge fan of making mixes, So yeah, I can't say I have a favorite album, but I have just a bazillion favorite songs.
I like it. Number 9, name an artist whose output you'll consume anything they release, even if you have to ever be apologetic for it.
Oh, well, you know what? I would say that Miles Davis and John Coltrane, I mean, not that they have anything new to release. Well, actually, that's not true. There was a new Coltrane thing just a couple of years ago. And of course, Miles is a part of Columbia, which loves the whole, now we'll release every, little scratch and tidbit. But no, yeah, almost anything those guys did, I want to hear at least once, And that's another example. Miles is another example of someone where you're like, oh God, I don't want to think about some of the things he did, and especially because talk about Peter, Paul and Mary, especially because Miles's music is so sweet, that the thought of him like beating people up and stuff like that, and just being a lunatic sometimes is kind of hard to take. But I think it's a little bit easier to when there's no lyrics, it's a little easier.
Yeah, because you don't have to read into things. Like it doesn't paint a different picture when you hear a certain line and you go, oh no, I'll never hear that again. Like the same way that I did.
Right, exactly. Like some of R. Kelly or Michael Jackson's lyrics are a little bit like, oh my God, that's kind of on the nose.
Michael Jackson's a big one because he has this song called Speechless, and it's one of the most beautiful songs I ever heard of in my life. And it's on the Invincible album, which, critics panned and stuff like that. And it was the last thing he released while he was alive. And I remember like getting the Vibe magazine interview when it came out, and they're like, Speechless is one of the most beautiful songs I ever heard. Tell us a little bit about the inspiration behind it. I was like, here we go. And he was like, I was in Germany having a water balloon fight with a bunch of children. And I was like, God damn it. Like, like you had one chance here to help me out. And now like I can't hear that ever again because I'm like, oh, shit. Lie to me.
Oh my
Lie
God.
to me, MJ. The 10th and final of the top 10 countdown. What is your favorite Jawn of all time? What's something that you just absolutely love?
You know what? Probably the movie that I have seen more than any other is Monty Python and the Holy Grail, which I was introduced to when I was 7. I remember my brothers, they would watch late night movies, and the weekend before the film The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly was on, the Sergio Leone spaghetti western, and they were like, oh, this is going to be so cool, and Kev, you should watch this. They wanted to expose me to it. But when the music came on at the beginning of that movie, it scared me. I was like, oh no, this is going to be horrifying. It felt like a horror movie to me. So I ran away, and they were like, oh, whatever, you're lost. Then the next weekend, PBS had playing Monty Python and the Holy Grail. And again, it was late night. It was like 11 p.m. or something like that, way past my bedtime. And they were like, Kevin, come on, check this one out. Check this one out. And that one starts with this music that goes, it starts as if it's going to be really heavy. And again, I almost ran out of the room, and they were like, Kevin, stay here. You'll see it's going to be funny. And I had just never seen anything like it before. All of my favorite like art experiences are coming into something having had no priming for it, just like having had no marketing, no idea what you're watching. Citizen Kane when I was 9, Blue Velvet when I was 16, and Monty Python and the Holy Grail when I was 7. These movies were just like, I was just like, what is going on here? And oh gosh, it was just so funny. And I love that when you're a kid, you can appreciate things without even understanding them, Like I remember, I think I saw All the President's Men on TV. The whole family was sitting around watching it. And I must have been around 7 or 8 at that time too. And literally had no clue what was going on in this movie. You know what I mean? Like I didn't know about, I hadn't followed the Watergate hearings when I was 2. But I just knew that movie was riveting, like there was very exciting stuff happening in that movie, and I was fascinated by it. And I think it was very similar with Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where it was just, I just thought it was hilarious, although I could not have explained why or what was going on.
Yeah.
And,
on
then
levels.
yeah, totally. And from that point on, I just watched it over and over. When VCRs came out, I bought a $300 Betamax. That was my first big purchase of my life. Saved up the money. And so, yeah, I watched that one over and over again.
Oh, it's beautiful. I love it. And it kind of paints the path that you took through the state and all. Like it makes sense that it would be so pivotal in your life. So like we said, this Thursday, March 2nd, World Cafe Live, we got the Risk Live show. What's the website address if people want to pick up some tickets for this?
Yeah, it's at risk-show.com/tour. So risk-show.com/tour.
Perfect. And if they want to follow you guys on the socials, what's the best way to track you down?
Everywhere on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, we're at Risk Show.
Fantastic. Kevin, thank you not just so much for doing this interview, but thank you for the laughs, the quotes, and for creating such a beautiful space for people to share their crazy stories, man. Like, I genuinely appreciate everything you've done, and I'm so excited to get to be a part of it in April.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, this was a blast.
Epic. My thanks again to Kevin for joining me on the show today. Tickets are still available for Risk at the World Cafe Live this Thursday, March 2nd, featuring stories from Fancy Feast, Jad S., Jillian Markowitz, and Kevin James Doyle. Visit www.risk-show.com/tour for tickets and details. You can find Risk on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Risk Show. And you can find Kevin himself at The Kevin Allison. Links to all of those are in the show notes. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to subscribe to the Yo, That's My Jawn podcast, wherever you get your podcasts from. And y'all, it's not too late. You can get yourself a super awesome Jawn Scout Merit Badge for Citizenship of the World just by rating and reviewing us. Don't forget to visit www.yothat'smyjawn.com for articles, merchandise, and links to all of the previous episodes of this podcast. And while you're there, be sure to sign up for our mailing list to get all of the updates delivered straight to your inbox. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/YoThat'sMyJawn for updates and live streams. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Yo That's My Jawn, and search Yo That's My Jawn on YouTube to find the Yo That's My Jawn YouTube channel. Like and subscribe the heck out of that ish. We want to hear from you. Reach out, and touch some Jawn. All right, I got a little Farley in the beginning of this episode, didn't I? Whatever, no shame in my game. Blue skies. Until next time, everybody.
Hey yo, displace the guilt and embrace the pleasure. Your taste in music doesn't have to be.
Yo, That's My Jawn is a Lonely Monk production, written and produced by yours truly, Nate Runkle. Theme song by Phil Tyler Music featuring Nate 3.0. Special thanks to Fox Run Brands, DX Ferris, Andrew Scott, Natalie Runkle, and the incredibly brilliant and wickedly stunning Katie Daubney. If you or anyone you know has any ideas they would like to share or any guests they would like to hear on the podcast, please feel free to reach out to us at yothat'smyjawn@gmail.com. Or you can leave an audio message for us and possibly hear yourself on a future episode by visiting anchor.fm/YTMJ/message. Until next time, be sure to displace the guilt and embrace the pleasure and shout to the world, Yo, that's my Jawn.